Hey everybody, and welcome back to Vestanland. This is episode 32, and in this episode, I'm starting things off a little bit differently by giving you guys kind of an overview of what I'm going to be doing. The main thing is building a custom metro station in this area right here, between the kind of main park and the government complex. I'm also going to kind of connect up the metro lines sort of all around the perimeter of the island here, building a custom metro station out on the west side, and also doing a little bit of infill south of the main stadium here, kind of filling out this area. And you'll see me do a little bit of detailing, kind of just all kinds of different things in this episode. Yeah, trying a little bit of a different format, giving you guys an overview of what the city looks like before I start building. And yeah, let me know how you guys like it. And I will now get into the usual time lapse. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a second. Hello, everybody. I'm back as promised, and starting off with a cinematic shot of some of the just infill progress that I made. Again, I could have, made this part of the video, but I decided not to just because I've done it in a bunch of other episodes. And yeah, instead, I'm going to jump right into detailing this kind of waterfront plaza area. If you saw the Center City Loop tram ride video from last week, you'll have seen this area. I sort of had just kind of been putting it off. I didn't really get to it when I was building this area for the first time. So I decided to go through now just because I wanted to make that tram video. And I wanted this area to look nicer. And yeah, getting back into doing some detailing like this, which I haven't in a while. Because I spent so much time working the airport, which is kind of its own challenge, its own type of build. So yeah, it was good to get back into the city like this. I started off just putting down some fences and planters, and then adding this kind of sort of basic tile decal to kind of set off those buildings from the plaza. And then yeah, using decals again to just add some texture, add some cracks. I went back. This is an area that I had done with these this little tram intersection. I had used procedural objects to detail this like a while ago, but for whatever reason, those PO'd decals got deleted, so I had to redo that part. I also went through and added the masts that are holding up the wires for the tram. I sort of neglected to do this, which is obviously kind of an obvious like plot hole almost. I mean, how are these wires staying up there if they don't have any masts? Obviously, it functions regardless, without these, but in terms of realism, definitely an important little thing to add. It's something I have to sort of just make sure I'm doing. Again, you can see I'm using intersection marking tool to add those in places, which makes things a lot easier. And then I'm also detailing this tram stop here, using the same like type of platforms that I've used for the metros and the train station platforms. Again, I don't know, it's probably not the most realistic, but I'm sort of thinking that, all the transit is kind of probably run by the same agency in the city and in the country. So I think it makes sense to have kind of a consistent theme like that. Again, none of this right here is super new, just because you saw it in the previous video. And now we're getting into the actual sort of meat of this episode, which is really fleshing out the transit system and making it just really super realistic and just like getting a really good set of infrastructure developments down. I started off by doing this kind of cross mountain tunnel thing for the regional rail network. This is something that'll be heavily used in the future, I imagine. It took a while to build because, as you can see, the FPS was really not my friend during this build. It was super laggy, so I apologize for that. But in terms of what my thinking was here, it's pretty common for cities to have center city tunnels like this, sort of like an S-Bahn network. And that's kind of what I was thinking with that. And down the line, there'll be kind of all of the regional trains will kind of route through that tunnel. But yeah, that's kind of in the future. In the meantime, I'm doing a little bit of terraforming on this mountain, making it a little bit bigger and making this ridge a little bit more defined, just to kind of give a little bit more of a reason why a tunnel would have been necessary, as opposed to, like, kind of having the train like wind through this area. Um, yeah, I kind of try to do that as I'm going. Obviously, I made this map, one way, but then I sort of feel like I have the freedom to kind of just edit it and make sure kind of everything kind of flows together a little bit more nicely. Now what I'm doing is creating this kind of triangle junction here for the metro. As I explained earlier, we're gonna have these like two triangle junctions here, which kind of form the most important intersections for the metro network, and are gonna allow us to have these two kind of looping lines, which will kind of cover the whole city and the whole island really effectively. And yeah, it was important to do this now so I could actually route trains, like set up metro lines, and get them running through the city for the cinematics, which you'll see at the end, and also just for my own peace of mind, because as you'll see, I built a pretty detailed metro station, and it would have been a shame if trains weren't able to run through it. Yeah, so now we're on the eastern part of the island, which I had set up some roads kind of marking out where I wanted these metro tracks to go, and now I'm actually putting them down, using a lot of Move It and Node Controller to kind of beautify things a little bit, adding trees in places just to kind of signify that this area is obviously going to have, it's going to be pretty densely developed, but I haven't gotten around to it yet, so it's good to kind of just have these trees kind of just like marking off areas, making it look a little bit more realistic, even though it's not finalized by any means. And here you can see I'm connecting the metro up to the existing metro tunnel, which I had just sort of put down as kind of a throwaway build like a long time ago, just as sort of a placeholder. Yeah, now I've sort of connected everything up, and as you'll see a little bit later on in the video, everything is connected and everything works pretty well. Now I'm getting into, again, the kind of focus of this episode, which is this crucial metro station. It's probably important to mention this point as I'm using them right now. This build was only possible with the recently released one-way Berlin metro tracks that Kloos made. I had mentioned it, I think, in the last episode that the only negative of this asset pack is that there weren't one-way tracks like this, and then Kloos must have, maybe he heard that, I don't know. But of course he went ahead and released this asset right here that I'm using. And yeah, super helpful, made this build possible. What I'm doing here is creating a cross-platform transfer, which there are plenty of videos. If you don't know what that is, you can look up for people who are more of an expert in it than I am. But basically, what it's going to allow is to have two lines running through this station, and if you want to switch lines, you just have to walk across the platform, quite literally, to switch lines going in the same direction. And basically, what I'm thinking is there's going to be the line that's going straight through the city going up to the airport. I'll be kind of running just north-south, and then there'll be a circular line that kind of connects more of the city, sort of intercity or intra-city, I should say. And then this station will be a really important transfer point for people, and yeah, it was important. Obviously, like the AI mechanics in the game are not really that sophisticated, so it's probably not going to exactly work that way. But I don't know. I kind of like thinking about how it would work in real life, and that was kind of my my mindset going into building this station here. Yeah, you can see I've sort of fiddled around with the layout a little bit. I initially it was more that I just didn't really know how I was going to build it. I was kind of had to place things down and see how it looked. I ended up deciding to go for two like pretty big platforms here. And basically what's happening is if you're looking from the existing city, like looking towards the mountain and the airport, you have one line which has trains going in both directions on the right, and then the trains that are going north are going to the rightmost platform, and then the trains coming from the north will be coming from the left side of the center platform, and that just kind of is flipped on the opposite side of the station. And to accomplish this, I needed to create a flyover with these, again, with the single tracked one-way metro tracks. And this took a lot of trial and error. I had to, as you can see, I had to raise one of the tracks that were coming into the station. Initially, I had them at the same level, but to sort of accomplish this with a realistic clearance for the trains, I had to raise this probably 10 or so meters above the other one, and then they kind of merge. Not really. I mean, they sort of like end up at the same level when they're in the tunnel. But yeah, when they pop out here, like one is dramatically higher than the other. And yeah, you can see there, I'm kind of just shifting things around as sort of as little as I can, while still having it work. You can see I'm using a prop train just to kind of gauge what the clearance is like and how much I need to edit things. As you can see here, there's plenty of clearance, and it is a little bit easier with train tracks like this. Obviously, you're not going to have like a variable height train. Like when you're doing roads, you have to think about like the tallest possible truck that could go through, and that's really not an issue here because the trains are always the same height. Now I'm doing the same process on the mountain side of the station. I had to move these like tunnel portals a lot farther away to create kind of realistic transition between the different heights and the different sort of just how these lines would be merging in and out. I also had to, at least I mean, again, I say I had to. This is all stuff that I created on my own. But the way I set this up is I have this road bridge kind of going over this sort of junction of different rail lines, which I thought was pretty cool looking. That kind of added another constraint as to where I could put things and how far away I needed to have these tunnel entrances. Again, you can see I end up placing that road back. I deleted it just to get a better view on exactly what I was building. But yeah, I used a lot of the network multi-tool to get all the slopes right. In terms of realism, they're probably a little bit too, like the slope is probably a little bit too high, but it's reasonable, about 4%, which I think is probably a little too much, but doesn't look terrible. It doesn't look like a roller coaster or anything. And yeah, I sort of, again, basically what happened was I had to kind of just like shift these roads and train tracks as little as possible, until like it sort of looked okay. And you can see what I'm doing here is replacing that middle set of tracks with just the normal two-way, two-track station track. And I had to do this because I realized sort of after I built this, and I almost got very upset, because the one-way station tracks are only left-hand boarding, and that was going to like mess up my whole station layout. But then I realized I could just use the existing two-way metro station track that I've used before, just to ensure that people were boarding the trains from all the right areas. And then I'm using Traffic Manager to manage those junctions. Obviously I have the flyovers instead of having those like switches in the actual track. And yeah, in terms of the realism of this, in like a real life situation, that would make this area a lot more reliable, because trains wouldn't have to wait for each other. They could just fly in and out, and it would be a lot more efficient. Yeah, you can see I'm using in terms of the trains that I'm using, these are the Sydney Metro trains. I don't remember exactly who makes them on the workshop, so my apologies there. I used these in the last episode in the Metro Yard, and these are, they're a super cool asset. They come in a prop form, as you can see what I'm using now, just kind of to get a sense of scale. So that's super useful. The actual asset looks super cool also. And you'll see a little bit later on, I use a couple, I'm trying to think who it is. I think it's Mesh D, who also makes the Copenhagen Metro asset. And yeah, he's made like a couple of props. They are sort of meant to be used together. They're all from the Sydney Metro. And yeah, kind of, you'll see that a little bit later on. All of those props kind of work together really well, and they help give sort of a unified look to the station. Now I'm adding in the actual functionality. I'm using the same pack of stairs and escalators that I used in the transit hub. I'm also using this pedestrian overpass building, except I'm converting it to procedural object. This area, this like middle platform thingy here, is not going to be functional. But I did want to have in terms of the realism, it would make sense that a modern station like this would have elevators to make it handicap accessible. And yeah, that's what this center platform here would be. In terms of where people in game will be able to access it from, you'll see I have the pedestrian paths running sort of at both ends, up and down these stairs. I'm not going to focus too much on running these pedestrian paths around because, again, I did a lot of it in the last episode, which you can check out if you're interested in kind of the process behind this. But very basically, it's just a lot of using no controller and move it to kind of like shift these just elevated paths into the exact right position and then turning them invisible, just so you know. So obviously you can't see them, and I can sort of add props and stuff around them to make sure that it's as realistic as I can get it. And what I found with these, I'm using the 2 meter wide version of the paths, and then I'm using no controller to change the offsets to 1 meter. And I found that makes it look, or like it makes it sort of like a perfect right angle, and kind of it looks a lot cleaner. Another thing I'm doing with no controller here is kind of tweaking this area with the bridge. I wanted to have this bike path kind of integrate right into this intersection. I was having a hard time figuring this out because the road that I'm using for the bike paths doesn't really have an elevated version, and then this actual path here does have an elevated version, but it doesn't connect to actual roads. So I had to play around with kind of sort of figuring out how to rectify this. What I ended up doing is just running the elevated bike path right up to the edge and then converting this area right here into an invisible path, which then kind of connects to the bike paths that are in the road. You'll see when I'll use intersection marking tool to make that area look a little bit better a little bit later on in the episode. But yeah, that's sort of just how the game works sometimes. It doesn't do exactly what you want it to do, so you have to kind of trick it a little bit. Now I'm using the same Cluse retaining wall with the grass on top that I used in the previous episode. Again, just sort of covering up all that kind of weird terrain texture. And obviously, when you're dealing with these like dramatic height differences, the texture tiling isn't great. So yeah, having an asset like this kind of just smooths everything out, makes things look a lot better. And again, it kind of has that same almost like eco-brutalist aesthetic that I was kind of going for in the last build. And yeah, since this is right next to the park, it looks pretty cool, I think, having the kind of green space kind of continuing right up to the station, which then obviously has a lot of concrete. And yeah, so now I'm doing more connections with these paths from the park episode. I think that was episode like 14 or something, where I built this park. And I have, this bike path and pedestrian path running directly over the station here. They sort of like connecting right into it, which I think is pretty cool looking. In terms of the like development around here, around the station, obviously we have like the whole like government complex, and there's a couple other builds that I'm probably going to do in the area. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with this actual like area that's like right on the park. I imagine that there would probably be like some push to develop this area right around the station with some apartment buildings or something like that. But it's also like would be taking away land from the park, so I'm not sure. That might be another episode or part of an episode in the future. Let me know if you have any ideas for that specifically. In the meantime, I am now going through and detailing the actual station, using a lot of the same props that I've used in previous builds. These modern benches being one of them, and also the trash can are all from the new platform pack. I can't remember who released it, but a great collection of assets. And I'm just copying and pasting this kind of setup of props here so that they're kind of uniform across all the platforms. And then I'm adding these signs, which I believe are also from Cluse. I mean, this is like, I should like name something after him in this city. So many of the assets are created by him. And this Now, this is another thing I should point out here. I'm putting in these platform screen doors on the edges of the platforms, and initially I was using the Yamanote line ones from Japan because they were just like the first ones I found in the workshop. And then I realized that the creator of the Sydney trains or City Metro train asset also created a um, platform screen door asset, which is compatible. So you'll see I'll switch these out for that a little bit later on. I decided to keep this in just because it was kind of it kind of took a while, and I figured it should be part of the video making process here. Yeah, using these assets, which are also great. You can see it works to convert these to procedural objects and kind of customize them to the exact size that you need. But yeah, I end up finding an asset that's actually designed for these trains and lines up perfectly. Another thing I should point out is I've been using, this is just a mistake that I made on my part. I've been using 5-car trains because they came. I mean, I was thinking like 5 cars, that's kind of unusual, maybe just to make it different. But then I realized the actual, like when you have the real metro trains spawning, they only come in 4 and 6 cars. So I built these platforms for 5 cars. But I guess I'll just have to have 4 cars, and there'll be a little bit of extra space, which I guess isn't the worst thing in the world. Now what I'm doing is adding the station canopies, again from the same like new platform pack. I decided to convert these roofs here to procedural objects just to have a little bit more control over them. I've also been having trouble with using props and move it, where if I select a prop, it kind of like it snaps to like a height like just 10 meters higher for no reason. So yeah, that's made it super difficult to kind of, especially with this build because, yeah, I mean there obviously there's a ton of props and they all need to be at specific heights. Ended up just converting a lot of them to PO, which made things a little bit easier, but it was still kind of annoying. I don't know. There's probably some simple setting that I just have set up incorrectly. But yeah, if you're having a similar problem, let me know in the comments. I'd love to have if there's a quick fix, I'd love to know what it is. And yeah, now I am getting back to what I'm actually building. I'm now creating the kind of like structure above the platforms. I'm really happy with how this part in particular looks at the end. I ended up creating like these kind of 3 almost like concourses or mezzanine levels above the 2 platforms, and I'm really happy with how like there's kind of the contrast of the 2 different styles of roofs. I mean, they're kind of similar, but a little bit different also. I'm using the same. I've done used this technique a lot, using this prefab wall, converting it to procedural objects, and then using that just to create sort of all sorts of things. In this situation, I'm using it to create basically a railing, and then placing that kind of glass fence prop on top to make it look a little more interesting. Yeah, as I mentioned before, these elevators are not functional in game. But I think it's important to kind of just break it up visually instead of having just the 2 things on the end. And then in terms of what the realistic station would look like in the real world, you want to have more points of access than just having it on the 2 ends of the platforms. I've sort of gotten back into using intersection marking tool, which I haven't done in a while just because of the types of builds I've been doing. Right there, I created that massive crosswalk for people to access this station. Also, I wanted to make it easy to access directly from that tram stop that's in front of the sort of government center. Again, just kind of wanting it to make this like as functional of a real life transit system as possible, even if some of the actual functionality isn't in game. I still like thinking about like how it would work in the real world. And yeah, this is back to what I mentioned before. I have this kind of invisible bike path that's kind of spliced into this intersection right here. You can see I'm using intersection marking tool on it to kind of get these markings kind of sort of cheating in a way, I guess. But yeah, you can see this is not how you're supposed to use these assets, but I just, I had to make do. Again, it just looks kind of wonky if you look at it too long. But yeah, I thought it was end of the day, I mean, putting a positive spin on it, I thought it was a creative way to kind of solve this problem of wanting the kind of elevated path over the train tracks, but then also connecting directly to these bike paths that are like integrated into the roads. Um, and yeah, I mean, again, that's another thing. Let me know what you think about that, or if there was an easier way of doing it. In the meantime, I'm going back to detailing these concourses. I kind of switched off, like I often do, between working on different parts of the city at different times. This was a little bit easier because I could kind of just copy and paste things that I had built. Um, mainly like the railings, and then also like the you'll see a little bit later on a couple of the props that I add. These kind of, again, these like prefab house walls, which I'm using as the railings. In this particular area, I kind of sloped them down to kind of mirror these steps that I added. These are the same kind of stone steps that I used in the previous build. Yeah, overall, this build is pretty similar to the last one. Similar concept, a lot of the same assets, but kind of a different context. So I hope it's interesting nonetheless. Again, I'm kind of also tying it back to the park that it's sort of, obviously it's right next to, and it would have to kind of interact with this park, and that it would make sense for it to have for residents of the city who are like in the park to have easy access to the station. Um, yeah, you can see that I'm sort of now looking at it and thinking about things I could add to that, or like replace that kind of restaurant parking lot with. I don't think it really fits in this part of the city anymore. So yeah, another thing for you guys to brainstorm about, and let me know what you think I should put in this area. I mean, obviously, I don't want to take away too much land from the park, but maybe having some apartment buildings right here. I mean, I imagine that'd be a pretty nice place to live, like right next to the metro, but then also right next to the park. So yeah, maybe that'll be part of a future episode. I don't know. I'm now using a procedural object, ploppable asphalt there to kind of connect the path to the slightly raised concourse level. And then this is the thing I was talking about earlier with the platform screen doors. I'm deleting all those Yamanote line from Japan doors, and then replacing them with these Sydney train specific ones, which obviously, they're designed exactly to fit these trains. You can see this is still at the point in the build where I had not figured out that there were only 4 and 6 car metro trains. So I spliced together 2 of the 4-car versions, thinking that somehow I had magically made a 5-car train, which obviously I didn't. But regardless, I'm now adding the fare gates, which are also from Sydney, I believe, or at least like based on the Sydney ones. I can't say I've ever been to Sydney, so I'm not sure exactly if it's based on that or if it is like a 1-to-1 type thing. But yeah, I created this kind of entrance, which I kind of copied and pasted to the other concourses. I have obviously the fare gates in the middle, and then I put a sort of on one side a concrete wall, and on the other side like a sort of a more of a wrought iron fence type looking thing. I was kind of thinking that this maybe would be like a gate for like a security person or something. I didn't actually detail it like that, but that was kind of what my thinking was. That like this kind of fence here, maybe that's like, if there's an emergency, like a guard could open that, and like maybe if there's like, there needs to be like a medical personnel that gets into the station or something. I don't know. That was kind of what I was thinking. Yeah, one of the last things that I kind of do here is just kind of sort of beautify the area a little bit, using an intersection marking tool to add trees on top of this retaining wall. Kind of again, so there was one thing I was kind of not happy with was how much space there was that was just kind of empty in this area. So I kind of like both filled some space and kind of marked off this station by adding these networks and intersection markings and stuff like that. All techniques that I've used before, but I found super helpful here again. Again, this is another example of the network multi-tool coming in super handy, using it to kind of, and also move it to get the slope of this retaining wall exactly right, and covering up some of the ugly clipping that I was having. Now I'm moving on to a couple of smaller projects just to kind of tie things together. This is on the eastern end of the island, close to the beach here, and you'll see that I'm adding this tram loop. I'm trying to get the tram network fully functional. I had to add these two loops at the ends of this kind of cross-town line, which you'll see in another tram ride video at some point. Um, and when I was doing that, I realized I had this another asset that Cluse released with these single track metro tracks. Was this station that had kind of a gap in the like or where a road would go. I used Move It to delete that road, and then just kind of splice the station over this tram loop, which I think was really cool looking. This is kind of a super quick build. But yeah, this is kind of hopefully gives you an idea of there's going to be kind of another neighborhood, right, sort of like on the beach, which will be an episode, and it'll be sort of built around this metro station and tram loop. So I'm looking forward to kind of the possibilities with in terms of how that looks, how I build that. If you guys have any sort of areas I could look to for inspiration, maybe I'd appreciate that. Because yeah, I think that'll be a cool build that'll kind of tie things together. And yeah, this station took as you might imagine, a fraction of the time to put together as the custom one that I spent most of the episode building. I also set up kind of the road network a little bit for this area. I think going forward, my strategy is going to be to do a little bit of just sort of infill as I go, like I did at the beginning of this episode, because I do want this city. I want this whole island to be filled with buildings. And there'll have to be a lot of just sort of development in between the specific projects that I do. So you can see this little area. It's going to be kind of not really a suburb. I mean, it's going to be pretty dense, but kind of similar to the area right next to it, as you can see. And yeah, I mean, this is kind of getting to the end of the episode. I want to thank you guys so much again for watching. I know the episodes have not been as frequent. It's kind of just, how it is sometimes. I'm going to try to add more of those transit videos just to, keep things coming. But yeah, again, thanks so much for watching. Feel free to check out the Discord and Instagram links below, and I will hopefully see you in the next video.